From what I understand, the United States was kind of the first country or nation to quote unquote invent free speech, right? No other country before our Constitution even had anywhere about how to freely speak about anything that you want, right? But it's a hard topic because every culture and every nation kind of defines what they believe to be acceptable speech. And we're going through that right now, even here in America. What is acceptable speech? We can have quote unquote free speech and say whatever we want, but is it true free speech if you say something that, big banks or big corporations don't like? And then the next day, your entire life is shut off because you said something incorrectly, right? So free speech, and we as a society decide that, by the way. So what we're undergoing, I think, even in the United States is the people here are determining what they view as free speech and enforcing that through mechanisms outside the law, right? So I think free speech is incredibly interesting because it's also incredibly new. And by new, I mean within the past, 300 to 400 years. Even the ideas that come from the Constitution, right, are ideas that may have been discussed in history before, but haven't been enshrined into the founding of a nation.
So then at the end of the day, depending on whatever the rules you decide to play by for, free speech are, you have to be prepared to be the loser, right? Or the winner, right? And there's a way that you can develop rules that you even like that you end up being the loser on because you get out shouted, you get outgunned, you get out legalized, all right? So there's no easy answer. And that's why we're always trying to figure out, I think, in American law and law in general, well, what are we prioritizing? And it is and will be forever impossible to not have someone get the short end of that stick. So the goal would be, how do we minimize the amount of people that this hurts?
Cracking down on religious cults is censorship nonsense. All I have to do is to call you a religious cult. Marxism, religious cult. Wokeism, religious cult. Nationalism, religious cult. They just leave Jesus out. So you cannot ban things just by defining them as cults. The problem is the definition of cult is itself flexible. The definition of Nazi is flexible. The definition of collectivist is flexible. Because these definitions are nowhere enshrined in the laws of physics, they're always flexible. And therefore, you either have free speech or you have nothing. There is no in between. Government does not protect your right to free speech. What the First Amendment says is that the government itself cannot restrict speech. That's what it says. Not that it has to protect your speech. It does not protect your speech. It doesn't protect you on YouTube. It doesn't protect you on Twitter. It doesn't protect you anywhere. Government has a separate function, which is a monopoly on violence. That's what defines government. It's the entity with a monopoly on violence within the given borders. If you take that definition away, government ceases to exist. If you try to use that to apply it to everything, then government becomes totalitarian. So just because a government prevents violence within its borders does not mean that it has the right to enforce everything within its borders. At that point, you might as well just throw away every right. So I don't think we want to mix the two. The point of the First Amendment is the government is supposed to stay out of speech-related issues. And as a side note, just by its existence, it has to prevent violence between the entities within the government. But just because it prevents violence does not mean that it now gets to control literally every single other thing that its citizens do. And the reason why speech is so important is because speech is just how we communicate thoughts. So the attempt to control speech is the attempt to control thoughts, is the attempt to control ideas, is the attempt to control minds, is the attempt to control creativity, is the attempt to control people. And that is why it has to be fully and completely resisted with every fiber of your being if you consider yourself a free thinker and a free person.